Our guest today is the kind of person who can read you better than your therapist can and make you laugh while doing it. A master of turning psychology into something playful, he has analyzed over 50,000 people and turned it into valuable insights for everyone. From TV interviews to his best-selling book, The Power of Personality, he's helping people stop pretending and be who they really are. Please welcome the author, the life coach, and the creator of the animal archetype system, Eric G.
Hi, how's it going? That really pumped me up. I feel like a boxer, when they go into the ring and they hear all the great things about them. That hyped me up.
That's great. That's great. That's the purpose. I'm doing good. How's your day going today?
Great. My day just started, as I mentioned before. I'm not the earliest of risers. I guess maybe that has to do with my personality type. But yeah, I just started at 10:30.
Okay. So here's my first question, and I think this will really set the context for people. Tell us a bit about your book and what should people expect reading it?
I like to say, obviously I'm going to say this shamelessly, it's not the typical personality typing book, and that I think most personality type books have a test at the beginning. You take this cookie cutter test, maybe 30, 100 questions at the most. Then you get your type, and then there are all these prescriptions like, oh, you're this kind, you're the south directional type, this is what, you are, and all that kind of thing. My book was designed more to be the test. Like, I always feel like those tests are really cookie cutter, right? Like, they're not going to totally figure you out just based on a bunch of random questions that everyone's getting. Right. So my book goes through my entire methodology and helps people, when they read it, become the test so they can type other people around them better, but also typing themselves, right? And really understanding who they are.
Okay. And tell us a bit about your method of when you say typing, what exactly should people expect? Because as you said, a test is not going to be able to just tell everything about you. It's a more generalized version, but not everything's going to match about you. So what should people expect when they try to work with your system?
This is going to be a familiar number. I break it down to 16 personality types. But mainly I break it down to 4 major groups. And then within those four major groups are 4 subgroups of personality types. Obviously, 4 times 4 equals 16. Yeah. But really, my book tries to use stories. It uses a lot of pop culture references. My whole goal is, I'm not trying to tell people something that they don't know. Now, they might not know that they know it. I think we met thousands of people in our lives, and we have all this knowledge stored in our brain, and we might not necessarily know how to use that knowledge to understand people better and put people in the boxes, but really understand patterns of behavior. And I think my book helps people understand the patterns of behavior that they've seen, but maybe have not been able to recognize within the people around them.
Interesting. So the way you see the system is for them to be able to understand themselves, but more importantly, the people around them better. Correct?
Yeah, I think we do. It's a little bit of both, right? I think the more we understand the people around us better, we start realizing, it's okay to not be like those people because I myself am different than those people. I think one major part of my book is that we all value different things. And I think most of the time when we accept personality differences, they tend to be very superficial, right? Like, oh, that person's organized. I'm more flexible. They're more outgoing and I'm more shy, and I think those seem to be important to a lot of people, but deep down inside, they're not, they're pretty superficial, right? I think my book focuses on the fact that we value different things. And I think once we start accepting that we value different things, then that's when we can start getting along with people better, because I think value differences are the start of most conflicts, I think.
When people talk about value, I've heard of so many different perspectives on what a value means to them. For you, when you say, people will understand what they value and what they will see others value, what does the word value mean to you? Because I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, it'd probably be easiest if I just say, there are 4 major groups, right? One values safety and security, one values excitement, one values self-knowledge, and one values information. And I think that dictates, you can tell the difference, right, between those two things. And I think the major one that makes about half the population of people values safety and security. So when we think of the things that are often told to us by our teachers growing up, maybe our parents, maybe not, on TV, we're told, oh, you should like get a job, like we'll do well in school, behave so that you can go to a good college, get a good job, and then have the wife and kids or husband and kids or whatever, the 9 to 5, steady, right? And I think that's a great linear approach, and it fits for a lot of people, but it doesn't necessarily fit for everyone. There are some people who don't want to live that life at all, and they just want to like skydive off, out of a plane in the Michigan, And so I think in general,
they're adventure seekers.
Yeah, like my sister, for example, the first job that she got out of college was on a deep sea fishing boat, So I think it's important to understand that those value differences are not superficial things, or the differences are not superficial. They're very, very different, but that's the beauty of it. And the funny thing is, in terms of like the most common romantic coupling in percentage-wise, is the person who values safety and security with the person who values excitement, right? You'd think that the person who values safety and security would want someone else like them. But in fact, we know that we want different things because they complement us and they make us grow, or they help us grow, and they make us kind of appreciate life better.
It's so fascinating. We often get attracted to something that's not within us, something different. And I like the way Tony Robbins phrases this. It's often the part of us we've stopped identifying with, and we kind of hope that this other value, this other person is going to bring into our life, is going to spice up our life, or it's going to make that part alive again. But the problem that happens is people kind of want this other value coming in, and then the same value drives them insane. They want excitement coming in, but that's too much excitement because I value structure. So they struggle between this dichotomy constantly of I want this, but it drives me crazy.
Oh yeah, and then they end up trying to change their partner, right? And they're like, oh no, I got to make them more like me. But then they make them more like themselves, and then they're bored. And they're like, gosh, this is not fun anymore. And it's like, well, I wonder why. And I think that's a very, very common thing in relationships.
Yeah. What's the craziest things you've seen people do from an archetype system where they try to connect with different archetypes and you can see this is going to go wrong, but they do it anyway?
Oh, that's interesting. Generally when you're going with different archetypes, are you talking about in relationships, like people like trying to hook up with that? I think generally when you're going with differences, it's okay. But I will say, I mentioned there are two types: one that focuses on self-knowledge, and the other that focuses on information. This is going to get really wonky really fast, but those people tend to communicate at an abstract level. And there aren't that many of them. So when it comes to relationships, they might not necessarily go well with someone who's a little bit more concrete. However, they might see the opposite amongst. So I guess what I'm saying is certain opposites are good. Certain opposites theoretically are maybe not so good. It doesn't mean that that's a bridge you cannot cross and that you cannot at least, you can't bridge that the gap. But I do think it's a lot harder. I think when people speak concretely versus someone who speaks abstractly, it's going to be one of those weird things where they're not going to really fully understand each other.
It's a lot harder to get there.
It is, and you see the difference, and you're like, wow, I always think of I use a lot of fictional characters in my book because those are things that people can maybe identify with, and I just think of conversations when a character is really giving their expressing all these emotions or talking about some great themes of something they've read, and the other person's like, I don't get it, let's just focus on the here and now. You're getting too much into your head, and you can't have a relationship like that, right?
Yeah. In our pre-call, we were talking about certain universes that people really resonate with, whether it's Game of Thrones or Harry Potter. If you had to pick out two characters that represent what you just said, who would you pick out?
Oh, that's interesting. This is odd, but the first one that popped in my head, I was, watching. I use Game of Thrones a lot with my coaching, right? I'm also a writing coach, right? And I like to use that in terms of how to tell a story, and it's such a perfectly told story. At least seasons 1 through 6. And but there is a scene between two brothers. It's not really a romantic relationship, but there's a scene between two brothers, and they love each other. They're both very, very close. It's if anyone's seen the show, it's Jaime Lannister and Tyrion Lannister. And Tyrion is an abstract thinker. He in my type. So I use animals for my personality type, and he's a chimpanzee.
Okay, yeah.
When you think of Iron Man or Tony Stark, maybe Elon Musk, maybe Steve Jobs, that type. Like very like abstract, theoretical, like ideas just pop in and out of their head and they're constantly thinking of random stuff. Jamie is a Fox type. So he's more of the James Bond, smooth, cool, calm and collected, has a lot of fun, and really is into life, just trying to experience everything. Very easygoing. And the funny thing is, a chimpanzee and a fox can really get along quite well because at a surface level, they're both really flexible, both really easygoing, both very spontaneous and not too serious, right? But there's a scene in the show where they're talking about Tyrion's about to die. No spoilers there, but he feels like he's about to die, and has this whole allegory about his cousin who actually represents God, and he's wondering why is God so cruel. And Jamie's like, who gives a shit about that? Like who cares about that story? Like, what does that even mean? Like Jamie just doesn't connect on an abstract level. Sorry, that was a long story, but the point is, I don't know if anyone's ever had that experience as an abstract person where they're trying to give this whole soliloquy on what they've been thinking about in their heads, and the concrete person's just like, that's great, but why don't you do something about it? Like, why don't you actually do something in reality? And vice versa.
So when you say abstract, they're more dreamers. They just think more. If an abstract person was talking right now, how would they be communicating? I'm just so curious about what an abstract communicator would look like.
Well, I'm an abstract person, and I think abstract people tend to talk about their feelings or their thoughts, right? Like if they read a book. If an abstract person read a book and you said, "Oh, what happened in the book?" They'd say, "Oh, it was this story about Harry Potter finding himself because he didn't have any identity because he lost his parents," and they go into that whole thematic explanation. Where a concrete person is more liable to say, "Oh, was this cool book about where this kid learns magic because he didn't have parents and he fought this wizard?" Like it's a lot more concrete, like what actually happened, and both are fine. I think. You go to a university level and it's very abstract, so people maybe think that's like at a higher level, but it's not. Like both are great depending on the context of what you're doing. I think we need both in society, and that's the beautiful thing about personality typing is you understand that everyone's always like, what's the best one? And it's like, there's no best one.
There's no best,
There's no best. There might be a best one in a particular situation, like if I'm like playing in an actual sporting event, I want my teammates to be concrete because I want them in the now. Like I want them saying see ball, hit ball, or catch ball. I don't want them thinking, oh, what does this mean in my life? Or how am I feeling right now, right? So like it depends on the context.
Yeah, I think the way I understand it is abstract people are very deep thinkers. They go really deep it's not just the superficial fact. It's actually beyond exploring the meaning, and they're really in the depths of trying to see what does this mean for them, how do they feel about it, what's the deep aspect that's happening here. Whereas on the other side, it's people who are much more facts. Like this is what the situation is. These are the concrete steps that need to be done. Everything else, who gives a shit, as Jamie said. Right?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Like in Game of Thrones, once again, I think when Tyrion is preparing for a siege and he's like got his head in the books, and his concrete friend Bronn, who has all this experience in battle, is like, that's not how you prepare for a siege. Like, you're not going to find the answer in books. And Tyrion's like, well, that's what I got. Like, I'm reading all these books, like, to figure out how do I do this. And Bronn is like very like experiential, right? Concrete people tend to be very experiential. They learn by what they've done because they know it's worked and they know what hasn't worked. And so they kind of trust that.
I love how this conversation is going. So let's take someone who's abstract thinker and someone who's more experiential, concrete thinker. The concrete thinker, I feel, would be really good in execution because they just go do what they need to do and they try to experiment more and try to use those results to move faster. That's how I would think they would work. For someone who's more abstract, they're really trying to dig and trying to figure out this strategy that will work within this theory that they've thought about. In certain situations, experiential is really good. So for example, if you take career or certain aspects of career, implementation really matters. Like you do what needs to be done. But that's where my guess is an abstract thinker would struggle in those scenarios because they're thinking too much about the situation. How would you help someone who's an abstract thinker in such situations?
That's a great question because I think my whole thing is like focus on your strengths first, right? And really lean into those. But you also need to be able to do some of the things that you don't know to do. With an abstract thinker, I always say this: find your anchor first. Only because there's only about 15% of the population that are abstract. And I think they get a lot of flack in multiple ways. I had mentioned there are two packs, one that focuses on self-knowledge, one that focuses on information. And I call them the shamans and the smiths. And they both kind of have it a little rough sometimes because shamans will grow up thinking that they're weirdos and there's something wrong with them. And, like, because they see all these concrete people around them and they're not exactly like that. So they'll try to assimilate, usually at their detriment. Smiths, on the other hand, will be like, oh, those guys are idiots. Like, I got my thing and I don't care. I'm going to keep to myself, which gives them confidence, but it also kind of puts them on the periphery a little bit. So they might be the recluse, the hermit, the person living in a cabin in the woods. So I think in general, I tell those people, look, like, figure out who you are first and lean into those. Then you can start borrowing from other types and trying to be a little bit more concrete sometimes, or ask a friend how do they do it. But you have to be very careful when you ask a concrete friend how they do it, because if you're speaking to certain types, they'll be like, this is the only way to do it, and this is how you should become. And I think that's another thing too. We have to be able to distinguish who are you versus what you do. And I think those are two different things. Because, in terms of finding out what people's personality type is, people always go like, oh, like, look at what people do. And that's important. But what's more important is why they do it. Because why they do it will really tell you who they are. I always say, like, there's tons of different authors. Like, just pick author, being a writer as a profession. And you could pick like 4 different authors who are doing the same thing. They're writing novels, but they're doing it for far different reasons. Like if you took like Jane Austen, Ernest Hemingway, Tolstoy, like those are 3 people, Nietzsche, or not Nietzsche, I would say, I'm trying to think of a different, Aristotle. Those are 4 totally different personality types, but they're all writing. But they're doing it for different reasons. And I think that's what makes us who we are. Sure, let's do it.
Yeah. So I have a feeling I'm a more abstract thinker. And I'm trying to understand what you mean by I need to anchor myself. So as an abstract thinker, how would I work on better implementation? Because you said I need to borrow certain skills from people who are concrete thinkers. How would I go about doing it? Because I'm so abstract. Sometimes I'm in the theory, I'm in the feeling, I'm trying to find these strategies. And someone who's more concrete will be like, just do that. That's all you need to do. How do I shift that?
That's a tricky question because there are different abstract thinkers. There's 8 different abstract personality types, and each one is a little different because there's two separate packs, and then within those are 4, right? So 2 times 4 is 8. I can speak from my personal story. Like, sure. I'm a baboon type, and everyone's always like, oh, I don't like my beavers. People who get beaver personality types are always like, oh, beaver's so boring. I'm like, I'm a baboon. That's not a very flattering animal either. So don't be complaining about what. Not everyone can be foxes because foxes sound cool, or sharks because sharks sound strong. As a baboon, it's important when you know your personality type, you can figure out what your natural weaknesses are, and then that's what you work on. Because a different abstract type is going to have a different problem. As a baboon, one of my flaws is that I'm not always going to be able to finish the things I do. I get really enthusiastic. I get really excited about stuff. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be so fun, and like, I don't necessarily, especially when I was younger, I didn't always finish what I started. But I didn't always finish. I mean, I didn't finish probably about 80% of what I started, right? You read a book and you're like, this is great. And then you get 3 chapters in and then you see another book that's super interesting. Like, okay, let me do that one. Yeah. So knowing that helps me really focus on finishing that. And I kind of made, at least for me, I made a note like, look, I got to finish at least, I can't finish 100% of the things I start, but I can at least finish maybe 75 to 80% of the ideas that I have. And like having that concrete number helped me out quite a bit because I realized that, I got to put in this or otherwise I never get anything finished. Yeah. I still have a sausage maker sitting there in my kitchen that I bought like 2 years ago that I have yet to make or yet to use. So, I don't finish everything, but I finished more than I did as a kid.
So for you, it was recognizing that you have this weakness that you need to work on. and then keeping a target of how much of the things you pick up you need to kind of aim to finish, and the remaining you're permitted to let go.
Yeah, I think having a checklist for me helped quite a bit. But here's a difference though. I think so. Asking other types that are really good at finishing things, like I mentioned, beavers. Beavers are really good at finishing things. They're also really good at doing things that they might not necessarily want to do. Baboons are terrible. We're terrible at that. But I think the difference is though. So I've asked beavers what they do, and they have like a checklist, right? And then if they say, oh, and if I don't finish any of the things on the checklist, I feel guilty, so I have to do these. I think that's the difference. I think you can do what other types do, but don't try to be like them in terms of their mindset. Because for me, I can't think that way. Like if I don't finish it, I'm not going to feel guilty. I just got to be like, you know what, that's cool. Like I'm not a beaver. I don't need to feel this certain way. Like I got to do things that I don't want to do. I can try to do some of the stuff by following that checklist, but I got to be me, right? So I think that is probably why I'm kind of like, it's like a complex answer or nuanced answer. It's like, borrow from other types, but don't become them.
Yeah. I was just super curious because this is such a fascinating conversation to me. I took the test on your website twice. So one.
Oh, you don't tell me what you got. Don't tell me. Oh, I was going to ask. I was going to try to guess, but now I think I heard. Did you say direct or something? I think you. Well, can I ask you a question?
Sure. Go ahead. Let's see.
Were you a good student in school?
Yes.
Do you like to read?
Yes.
Were you a panda?
No.
Oh, you were a Smith, maybe. Were you one of the Smiths? I don't know. Now I maybe got it wrong. What did you get?
So based on the tests, I took it twice.
Uh-huh.
So one was with the Game of Thrones one was just the direct link that you had. The first time I got a humpback whale.
Oh, okay.
And the second time, I think I got a butterfly.
Okay.
So I wasn't sure how the tests worked.
Yeah, well, the trick about our test is we don't want it to be clearly obvious where it's going, but you're definitely, between those two, you're definitely a humpback whale. I will say that much.
Okay.
The butterfly is way more concrete, but the interesting thing is they do appear similar. So if you were to meet a butterfly and meet a humpback whale, you'd be like, wow, they seem kind of flaky, for lack of a better term. They seem kind of like out, like kind of doing their own thing, and very easygoing. So that would be like the butterfly would be like Rachel from Friends.
Okay.
A humpback whale is more like Harry Potter,
Okay.
And you said you're more abstract, so that's why I went humpback whale. Not to pat myself on the back, but a panda is actually very close to humpback whale. Generally, pandas were better students in school, so that's why I asked that question, because I was trying to figure out. So you might want to read the panda description and see if that fits a little better, because a panda and a humpback whale will have a lot in common because they both fit in the same pack. They're both shamans. They both want self-knowledge. They both are seeking it. I think a panda will be a little bit more studious and will read a bit more. So
Okay. So then I'm more likely to be a panda.
maybe, yeah. I mean, humpback whales are. How do you feel about nature? Do you like camping? Do you like going out into nature?
Oh, I love nature. I love
Ooh, okay.
hikes. I love hikes. I love. I don't like. Actually, in general, I like nature. I would say usually. I'm trying to see if there are exceptions to it. I like beaches. I like mountains. I like hikes. I like just camping in the forests and the quiet. I love watching the stars. So a lot of nature for sure.
Okay. And do you feel like you? Yeah. So that actually is more humpback whale-ish. So now I'm like in between the two. So I would recommend reading both and seeing which one fits better. But the humpback whale tends to be more, I don't want to say isolated, but kind of. They're more insular. They kind of go into their own mind. They definitely are daydreamers. They get into their heads. Their weakness, of course, is that they navel gaze. And they also have some of the same problems that baboons do, which is they don't always finish the things they start. They just kind of like, oh, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Oh, but this is interesting. And they kind of float around like a humpback whale. Pandas are a lot better. They're a lot more structured. So they're a lot better at finishing the things and kind of like, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to do this, which tends to make them better students, right? So that would be a big difference between the two types.
I'll tell you this. For me, the harder part is starting a task. Starting a task is much harder than finishing it. And usually that stems from lack of clarity. I feel more lack of clarity. Overwhelm is a common thing for me. So I don't know which one fits it, but it seems like I have characteristics from both of them.
Yeah, I would just read both because they are different. I think the panda lives a life that's a little bit more stressed. Not a little bit, a lot more stress. That's probably the best indicator. Do you feel like every day you feel a little bit of stress? If not, then you're humpback whale, because humpback whales don't really live with as much stress, I think.
I think stress is more, yeah.
Okay, then you're probably a panda. And that's just because pandas grow up feeling that they want to be like everyone else. Not that humpback whales don't. As I mentioned, shamans do have this tendency to want to assimilate. But pandas feel it probably the most out of all of the four. Meaning like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Like, I'm not doing the things like, I am a good student, but I don't really love it the way that I'm supposed to love it, or I'm being told that I'm supposed to love it. And then they start trying to become something else. And that causes a great deal of stress. And I think I always tell pandas, like, you got to do what you want to do and like be okay being yourself and not try to be like these gatherers, because gatherers are the 50% of the population that value safety and security. And they tend to be like, I'd say like 80 to 85% of teachers. So your pandas are going to hear that over and over and over again. And so I always tell my panda students, like, it's okay to be you, like be yourself. You are great, just lean into your strengths.
What's your journey been like so far, and what got you into personalities?
I mean, much the same story as I said, like right now, like it's now baboons they aren't going to be like pandas, and they're not super stressed all the time. We hide it a little better, but we still have that tinge of like, I am not valuing the same things that my classmates value and that my teachers value and that I'm being told I should value. Instead of doing my homework, I just take my homework and shove it into my backpack and maybe finish it, maybe not, and it comes out all crumpled. So I think a lot of that feeling of weirdness, I wanted to like discover what was wrong with me, and I read up a lot on personality types when I was younger. And then, the funny thing is my academic background is in screenwriting. So that is slightly related because there's characters involved. But it wasn't until I started my own education company that I got back into the personality typing. And there is when I started developing my own methodology, because we'd have about 1,000 students a year. So you could really see the interaction between my teachers, whom I teach this personality typing methodology, and also the students and also the parents. So that interaction is really important to help, because at the end of the day, knowing about personality types, it will help you grow. And so for my teachers, I wanted them to know that so they could help their students grow.
What's the most interesting way you've used the personality types?
Ooh, I mean, I think using it with kids, I don't know if it's the most interesting, but it was definitely the most effective. Like using it, just teaching my teachers and having that like go with every single student so that they could see what every single parent did. I would say I didn't necessarily work with as many students as I would have liked since I was like running the company. But I will say this, we used to recruit students at these fairs. And that's when I would have to do very quick reads, right? Because, you have a parent walking up to you, and this parent, you're going to have to try to convince them and go like, okay, how am I going to convince them that they should sign up with my company and hire my company to work with their student or work with their kid?
Right.
And each personality type will want to hear different things. So as I mentioned, the one that wants safety and security, they're going to know, okay, these people are serious-minded, they're institutional, they're authoritative, which was really difficult because I owned my education company when I was in my late 20s. So that was a little bit harder. So for them, I made sure I was really dressed up in a certain way. I couldn't just get away with wearing a t-shirt like some people in other companies did. But for like the personality type that values excitement, my mindset was always, okay, I can tell them about how fun we make it for their kids, how we'll do games so they can learn, how they'll learn hands-on and touching things. So that was probably the most interesting aspect, is that I was able to convince people using their personality type to sign up with us by connecting with them at their level.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. So at these fairs, you would literally be standing, and if someone's walking towards you, you would have to read what is the best possible way to present it and then just run with it.
Yeah, and sometimes I in the book I mentioned it's always good to have a stimulus there. So I also had my director who was sitting next to me, and she would do a lot of the talking, and I would do a lot of magic. So I had cards, in my hands, and I would be like shuffling them, like kind of like just shooting them from one hand to the other. And even with that stimulus, you could see parents' reactions to it. The more serious-minded ones might not necessarily love it as much. They'd be like, oh, I'm not going to take this seriously. Now, the ones that love excitement will definitely be looking at me shuffling the cards, and then I'll know exactly what. Usually the serious-minded ones, I'd send them over to my director, who is a lot more studious appearing and very like serious and very like on like very, very structured and on the nose on most things. And then I would take some of the more fun-loving ones. But that always helps if you have a certain stimulus, because like as I mentioned before, it's not necessarily how someone answers or what, like if you ask someone a question trying to figure out their personality type, it's not what their answer is that's important. It's how they answer it, right? Like even if someone says no and you're looking for a yes, you got to see, that didn't really seem like a no. That's actually definitely seemed like a yes. So I always believe in having some kind of stimulus and then seeing their response to it and then reading that.
That's so interesting. That's a really cool way to try and see which direction you need to go. And that's something I'll think about. The next time I'm at a fair, I'll definitely remember what you did and try to see if there's some kind of stimulus I can introduce.
Yeah, it's definitely laid out in the book. I'll lay out different, like I go over all the different tricks and reading tricks in the book as well, in terms of like giving a stimulus, seeing how they react, doing different things. So yeah, for anyone who wants to buy the book and read it, like you'll learn that.
I'll make sure to link it into the show notes for sure. Has there ever been a time where you were trying to read someone and it was completely the opposite of what showed up? You thought, like based on your read, it was X, and then it was contrary, complete the opposite end of what you read.
Ooh, that's, not recently, not totally different, because I mean, I hope that I don't totally mess that up. I will say this: if it's hard to read someone, sometimes it's probably not going to be your fault, in the sense that sometimes when people are hard to read, that generally shows that they lack confidence, right? The more confident, the easier someone is to read. A lot of times people are like, oh, so I'm just like, I'm so shallow, like I'm easy to read because I'm like just an open book. I'm like, no, that's a good thing, because that generally means you're really confident. If you're confident in who you are, it exudes out of yourself, right? And it's very easy to read. The trickier people are the ones who aren't really confident. They're doing weird things that don't necessarily match, and they're saying things that don't necessarily match. And I've never misread them as much as I just haven't been able to read them. It's just been like a I don't want to say a meh, but like kind of like all in the middle, where I'm like, shoot, I can't figure this person out because they're really inconsistent. It hasn't been, generally people don't totally do something that's opposite of what they are. And if they are doing something that's totally opposite of what they are, it's actually pretty easy to tell. Like, because they're not doing it particularly confidently.
Got it. So these have been so fascinating. And I think it's time to have our first game.
All right.
So
let's do it.
This game is basically what's going to be. I'm going to mention you've spent archetyping a bunch of people, right? Now I want to flip that lens a bit and get your instinctive takes. So just gut reactions. So I'm going to ask something like, what's the best archetype you've worked with? Or what archetype would you want to see more of in the world? Things like that. Okay? Just generic questions. If you don't have an answer, that's totally fine. But I want to see where your mind goes and what answers come up for you. So here's the first one. If you had to choose one archetype the world needs more of right now, which one would it be and why?
I think we need more shamans in general. So those 4 types to come up. I don't think we need more of them. I think we need more of them to show themselves and like be confident and reveal themselves, because shamans are the best at bringing people together. And I think that the world clearly is not. We're kind of at odds with each other right now. So I think we need some more shamans.
Interesting. So are shamans like coaches? What are the characteristics of shamans?
They tend, coaches are great. They tend to be a lot coaches, life coaches, teachers. I mentioned that gatherers often are teachers too, but there's always been those shaman teachers that often get burned out, unfortunately, and quit. But they tend to be like spiritual leaders, psychologists. That's probably the most common is therapists, psychologists. People work, counselors. Since their skill is in self-knowledge, or their value system is self-knowledge, they also want to share that their journey with other people to help them gain self-knowledge. So clearly, that works in a counselor's favor.
Okay. Which archetype do you wish you embodied more often? Maybe a trait you admire but don't naturally lean towards.
I would say the hunters. I mean, everybody says, I do really believe if people had a choice, like they would always pick, I would love to be a fox. Because foxes seem to live a very cool life, very flexible, they have fun, they're very confident, they're outgoing, and they just do what's in front of them, and they tend to be at least seemingly very good at those things. So I hate sounding basic, but probably I would want to be a fox and just kind of have that no stress level at all and just kind of just do what you do.
Interesting. What are weaknesses of foxes that people don't see?
Well, people will see these in that the biggest weakness of a fox is they can seem very disingenuous. They will tell people what they want to hear, and sometimes that can be great, which makes them the greatest salespeople, great at like agents, promotion. But, that can be a weakness too, because sometimes a fox doesn't really know what they really want because they're constantly just saying things to please others. And I think that would probably be a huge weakness sometimes.
So foxes have a characteristic of being pleasing to people, or are they people pleasers? Or I think there's a distinction. I just want to.
They are people manipulators. They will please people to get what they want. Yeah, they're not. It's not like they're sacrificing what they. Basically, so I have deviant roles in my book that I mentioned, and a deviant role is each type at their worst. Now, the funny thing is a lot of our strengths can turn into weaknesses and vice versa, right? So I think that's the important thing too. It's like for every person who's really sharp and shrewd and knows what people want, you have that person, and they can also be a con man at their worst, or a con artist, right? Like they can, they can lie to people and trick people. So that's a fox.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. What made you choose more of fox? Was it just the confidence, or was there something else aspect that you wish you could?
I think it's the ease at which they move throughout the world. And I'm a baboon. Baboons actually kind of sometimes seem like hunters, but we're not. Inside, we're like the duck who on the surface is like looks like we're graceful, and then underneath we're just like, oh my god, what's going on here? Like we're feeling a lot of that emotionally, where we don't always feel like we belong. A fox almost always feels like they belong because they really just don't care. They're like the Han Solo, right? They just go in and they do it, and that's why I chose it. Even though, once again, deep down inside, I probably wouldn't want that life. But I think at a superficial level, that life seems pretty fun.
Okay. If you could have dinner with one archetype, not one person archetype, what I mean is an archetype specifically, which one would you choose and why?
Well, when I think of dinner, I think of like interesting conversation and talking a lot about ideas. And so I'd say a chimpanzee. And so a chimpanzee is a smith, so they love information. Like Tyrion Lannister is a chimpanzee, right?
Okay.
So baboons and chimpanzees, the only problem with us together is that we might fight in the conversation over like saying, we would talk over each other. But I do think in terms of just pure dinner conversation, the flexibility of being able to bounce from one subject to another would not, like a chimpanzee or a baboon is never going to be like, no, we were talking about this. Let's get back to this. They'll just go with the flow and be like, we were talking about, okay, this is fun too. This is fun too. It's only when they start talking about something, when the other person starts talking about something not so fun, that the chimpanzee or the baboon's like, no, let's go back to that original conversation because I don't really want to talk about what you ate for dinner yesterday, Okay. So, definitely a chimpanzee archetype.
Okay, interesting. Out of all the archetypes, which one is the hardest to coach or reach emotionally?
It depends. At least I can only speak for myself because I do think it depends on your personality type, right? Like, I think the further you are away from someone's personality type, the scarier you are to them. You just exude this kind of like, they're like, whoa, this alien kind of feeling. So for me, it would definitely be, I'd say, a beaver. Theoretically, that's the most opposite to me, being a baboon. But I think a beaver, just because they tend to be much more, they focus on safety and security, and they're a lot less aggressive with it. They're the most cautious of all the types. And they're also concrete. And I think when I've worked with beaver students in the past, and a lot of it, they're the most difficult for me at least, because I really do have to restrain myself. I can't just push them into the water and expect that for them to swim, right? I think for me, emotionally, right? For me, I have to like create this safe space and secure space where they feel like they can tiptoe and into the water slowly. And sometimes I'm not always the best at being cautious and doing the slow approach, but that's what works best for them.
Okay. Fifth one. So I think actually we already covered this, because this question was going to be what archetype I am, but we went through that conversation already. But something I'm just curious about, there may be some people who are confused at this point, listening in on these animals that we are talking about. At a high level, if you had to give them details about the four major groups, what would they be? Like, how can people understand these better?
Well, so I have the terminology that I use for each one. I think I've used them, but obviously I can explain it. Because I used roles in a medieval village just to also explain like why there are so many of some types and there are less of other types, right? Because we kind of need some more in the population, right? So gatherers make up half the population. And when you think of a gatherer, that's probably going to be you, because that's going to make sense half the time, right? But what it really means is the person who's focused safety, security, making sure everything's steady, secure, they're responsible, they do what's expected of them, they do their duty, they pay their taxes, they get the jobs, and they do the jobs that maybe some people don't want to do, and they're good parents, or at least I shouldn't say they're good parents, because everyone can be a good parent and everyone can be a bad parent, but they definitely take parenting very seriously. Those are the gatherers. And then they're the hunters, and they make up about a third of the population. And they're the fun-loving, spontaneous. They do what they want to do. They want their freedom. They love being excited. They're the life of the party often, and they're very action-oriented. So everyone knows people like that. You know those two groups because we see them often clash with each other in stories, right? They're like the odd couple, the Bert and Ernie of the story. Clearly, Bert of Sesame Street is the gatherer. Ernie's the fun-loving hunter, right? So those are the two major groups. And then we have the shamans. The shamans are kind of the space cadet, diplomatic, always really into like people and understanding people. And just like a shaman, they're kind of like the spiritual leaders of an organization. But you don't need that much of them. You only really need one shaman to tell you that it's going to rain. But you need a lot of gatherers to, sow the seeds and gather the harvest.
Yeah.
And then the Smiths are like the tech savvy. They love information, and they love creating things that make the world more efficient. And so just like a blacksmith, right, they're creating tools of efficiency, right? You don't need that many smiths. You just need like one or two to create these tools, and they give them to hunters, and then the hunters execute them. They use the spears, they use the swords, whatever, the nets. So now, today, those smiths would often be in tech, as I mentioned, because when you think about it, technology is like probably the easiest or the greatest form we have of efficiency now, at least. It's a huge tool for that, right? So, so that's would probably be the four. In the book, I go over like high school stereotypes just to be funny, and I try to do it in one line. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but like for each animal type, so there's 4 animals within each of those groups that I mentioned. Each animal type has a very superficial, quick high school stereotype that fits them. So
nice.
Yeah, the stag would be like the bossy group leader. They're the ones who always like are, when you get into a group, they're always like, okay, this is what we have to do, guys. Like instinctively, they just feel like, okay, I'm just going to be in charge. Let me just do this. So
when you meet people for the first time, right? And if this is for people who may want to archetype others, what are probably the first 3 things you try to notice that will help you understand which direction or which personality type they may be?
I go with the value, and I know it's like, how do you figure out what someone values? You can always ask people, but you're always going to get weird answers. Right? Everyone's going to say they value everything, right?
Yeah.
I would definitely go, since most of the population is a hunter or gatherer, I would try to just lean on those first and see, are they hunter and gatherer? And they don't seem like that, then you can kind of push over to the other side. And you can figure that out by what do they talk about. Do they talk about concrete things? Like if you talk to them, what are they really specifying? Like, what'd you do today? Or if you ask them what they did today, most people say, oh, this is what I did. But abstract people will start talking about how they felt about it, what they think it meant, what they thought they learned from it, where concrete people tend to like be more like very specific on the details. So I think that's the first thing. I figure out whether they're on the concrete side or the abstract side. Well, that's not the first thing I do. The first thing I do is go by feel, but I definitely wouldn't recommend people to go by feel until they've practiced a lot, until they've bought the book, read the book, and practiced all the things that I go into. But if I were just to give you an explanation of how I probably first started doing it, I'd probably say, figure out whether someone's concrete or abstract and go from there.
And when people are using this tool, what should they be careful with? Because people can judge others incorrectly. What should they be careful with when they're trying to use this tool?
Definitely don't think of it as putting people into boxes. I really hate that. And I know people are like, what, you're categorizing people. I will say everyone categorizes everybody. Now, my methodology does it in a way that's a lot more nuanced, I believe, and a little bit deeper, right? You're not just saying, oh, that person's a type A because they're really bossy. No. It's more about learning about people. So I just tell people, don't feel like once you put someone and said, oh, that person is a peacock personality type, don't let that be the end. That's what I would say. Because the whole point is, I would love for people to constantly be learning more and more about the people in their lives. And as they learn more and more, feel free to change your assessment of them, right? Because when you learn deeper things about someone, you're going to like maybe change your mind and realize, oh, like I had a friend, and I've had this friend, I'd say like 9 years. I changed my mind about what personality type she was, right? Because just over a conversation about kids. And I was like, oh, like, I used to think you were a beaver, but now I'm starting to think you're a spider, just learning more and more. And this is someone I've known for 9 years. So I think the idea that we're constantly learning more and more about people, I think is a good thing.
Right. This is super fascinating, and it's going to get me to the next question. But what I've observed is people are not the same in every situation. So you could take them to a baseball game, and they could be really bored or really excited. And you may take them into a tech job, and they may be like, let's do this, this is awesome. Or they may just sit trying to learn a lot about it. I have an intuition that people's personality types change based on the context they are in. Have you noticed that to be true?
I would say that you can tell someone's personality type based on how they change their behavior within different contexts.
Okay.
So I would say that and that's a great observation and intuition, right? Because I'm always saying, that's why I don't love extroversion, introversion. And I know that's a big thing, and people write books on introversion mainly because they're trying to get into that introversion market, because the people who like to read generally will be quote unquote introverted. Because a lot of the arguments that I've had with people, or that people have given to me very early on, was like, yeah, but that's dumb. All that stuff is stupid because I'm extroverted when it comes to this, but I'm introverted when it comes to this.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, it is, because it's contextual. And so that's why I always base it on our value system. We will almost always be much more outgoing, excitable, and aggressive and forceful in things that we value, and much more reserved and less interested in things that we don't value. Right. And so I think that's kind of a good way to figure out someone's personality type based on, when they show their excitement and intuition.
That's awesome. I think that really clicks for me, because the things they value are going to be constant. So at least, unless it changes because of certain factors in their life, over an extended period, what they value is going to be almost constant. So with that, their behavior is likely to be similar in those situations.
Oh yeah, I have tons of people who say, "Oh, people think I'm extroverted, but I'm really introverted because and I'm like, well, neither works, but you're just telling me what you really like. So clearly you don't like this, so thus you're like more like, maybe you don't like all the social gatherings or all this like concrete talk. Abstract people tend to say that. We're like, people think I'm outgoing, but really I'm not. I'm like, well, no, it's just you don't like the social stuff, and you don't like talking about like people's children when people go on about how their kids, how many goals their kids scored in their last soccer game. You don't like that kind of thing. But I bet you if that person started talking about like a movie that you really loved or a book that you really loved, you'd be really into that conversation, right? So It just depends on the content, which is important to understand. Like we're all different and we all like and value different things. And some people are going to like ball games. Some people are going to like tech conferences. Some people are going to like both, and they might not like, an accounting. Well, I don't know if anyone really loves seeing an accounting spreadsheet, but people have different values.
Yeah. I think that makes the system really different. It's not just on behaviors, it's on what people actually value. I think that's a huge, huge difference. When people use this, especially in relationships, how can they use it in the best possible way? So we can take it in different situations, right? One is they're trying to find a partner. One is they're trying to decide if they should be with someone for a lifetime. One is if they get into conflicts. Let's keep these three categories. If another category comes up, I can always share it.
Well, the first one is like, I really think when you're finding out whether you like someone or not, I think just go with your feelings first. Try not to use personality typing, right? And then go with your feeling, like just go like, oh, I really like them because of this reason. I really don't like them because of this reason. And then once you have those feelings, then you can use personality typing to like, oh, okay, that probably means that they're this type. Right. And I think that's important to understand their type at that point, because you should know that they're not going to change. Right. They can grow into a better version of their type. But look, if you're dating a fox and they're super spontaneous and really fun, but you're expecting them to be the one, if you're in a relationship, to make sure that all the taxes are paid, they're not the person for you. Right? So they're never going to be that person. So don't try to change them. And I think in the beginning of a relationship, it's important to know that. It's also important to know that maybe you shouldn't want someone who's like you, exactly like you. Like we said, the people who are different from us help us to grow. So right. I think we can really use personality typing to say, hey, look, like, even though this person is different than me and I'm attracted to that, there is a future there because we're going to help each other grow. And so then once you're into like the conflict area, knowing personality type helps, because you're like going to realize, okay, we're having this conflict. Let's say the fox again. They're not like responsible enough. They're always late dropping the kids off, or picking them up. And I don't understand why they're like that. And you should understand why they're like that. Because like, oh, they're a fox. Not that they're doing it on purpose. They're just, their ability with time is not great. But you know what? They're also going to be that, you appreciate their strengths too, because they're going to be that parent when your kids are driving you crazy and, like you don't know what to do them. I'm just imagining that this theoretical person is a gatherer, and they're married to a fox, and they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so structured, and these kids are breaking out of my structure, and I have no idea what to do. The fox is going to be the one who's like, don't worry about it. I got it. We'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. They'll be really flexible, So I think understanding personality types helps us realize each other's strengths and tolerate our weaknesses. And, at the end of the day, I always tell people, look, you can be with whatever personality type you want. I mean, there are theoretically good matches, but I don't want to tell someone, oh, you can never be with that person. You can be with anyone you want, but you just have to understand that you're going to have this conflict and you have to be okay with it, and you can't try to change them.
I do feel, though, that there are some pairings that will challenge each other a lot more than help them grow. I think there are some that could be like in the vicinity of each other, so they kind of work with each other and can make it easier to grow instead of completely challenge each other. And some personality types, it's going to be so far that if they make up their mind, I'm sure they can grow using those challenges. But it will be more likely that you're going to be just ruffling each other's feathers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like the further you are, and I mentioned before, the abstract concrete divide is huge because that's so communication based. And I do think in any relationship, you're going to have to communicate. Like that's number one. Right. You don't have that. You're not going to get along, right? Or you're not going to really have a relationship. And so I do think that gap is a difficult one to bridge. It's possible. Mm-hmm. But I will say that if you're an abstract person, I will say this as a fellow abstract, maybe look for other abstract people, especially early on in your life, only because since I mentioned before, you want to find your anchor. A lot of times when an abstract person gets into a relationship with a concrete person, there's a lot of that abstract person trying to assimilate and become concrete. And I just don't think that's particularly healthy. So and that really happens when people are younger and they have less experience and less confidence, less knowledge of who they are. So if you are an abstract person and a shaman or smith, I would at least recommend maybe looking for fellow shamans and smiths, because that's generally the most common second marriage of a shaman and smith is a fellow abstract person. They tend to get married to a concrete person and then realize that they're unhappy. And a lot of that unhappiness tends to be because the concrete person doesn't really appreciate them for who they are and feels like they need to change them. So a lot of second marriages for those types are like a fellow shaman or smith.
Awesome. Time for our next game.
Okay.
So here's the next game. It's pretty simple. I'm going to give you certain duos, whether it's in the fictional world or in the real world. And it would be interesting to see what archetypes you see them as and what aspects do they struggle with and what works really well for them. Okay?
Okay, let's do it.
So the first one is Barack and Michelle Obama.
Oh, that's a real one. Oh, that one I know. Barack's a panda, for sure,
Okay.
and Michelle Obama's a killer whale. And I can say, I mean, once again, these are real people, so it's always hard because you never know for sure. But I have read both their books, and so that helps quite a bit, like in how they express themselves and what their their personal life. Generally, it's not even what they're talking about as much as how they express themselves and what how they say it, right?
Yeah.
Which is generally a good pairing. I mean, that's a shaman and a smith, which is theoretically a good pairing. They're both going to be fairly structured, but I guess that Barack, compared to the killer whale, which is Michelle Obama, and that's like the CEO type, hard driving, like one of the best students, especially in college, ambitious. Compared to that structure and that kind of hard driving, even a panda, which pandas are pretty structured, but a panda will pale in comparison to that in terms of structure. So killer whale is always going to feel like the panda's like, what are you doing? Like, get on with this. Like, do the right thing, And you can kind of see that a little bit between the two of them,
Okay. Here's the next one. Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Ooh, okay. So Beyonce, they're definitely both hunters.
Okay.
I'm gonna say that Jay-Z is a fox and Beyonce is a peacock.
Okay.
And both are performing-ish types. The peacock, as it is pretty easy to tell by the animal, is a lot more outgoing and like, look at me. Even though a fox is super outgoing too. But for Jay-Z was harder. I was either a fox or a shark. Sharks are a little bit more aggressive and quiet. So I'd say Jay-Z's a fox. Fox and a peacock.
Okay. And what would they struggle with in their combination?
So when two hunters get together, their problem is that they can burn out really fast. They'll burn hot and fast because they're both into excitement and new sensation that they might get bored of each other. So they constantly have to be having new things happen to them. Or what a lot of hunters do is they kind of have to have their own world, right? Like, okay, I'm going to do my thing and have fun and, I don't know, maybe have other partners. And the other person's going to be like, okay, I'm going to do my own thing, have fun. But we'll still be together and make that commitment and we'll come together like in moments of time. But they can get bored with each other fairly quickly.
Okay. Here's another one. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
Ooh, I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know that much about Steve Wozniak. I know Steve Jobs was a chimpanzee. Unfortunately, I don't know much about Steve Wozniak.
Okay, no problem. Let's go to the next one. Bill and Hillary Clinton.
Oh, this one. Okay. Bill is a fox, like kind of like Jay-Z had mentioned before. And then Hillary is a killer whale as well.
Okay.
So very similar to Michelle Obama. Well, not similar. I mean, they're the same types, right? So, hard driving, ambitious, great students, very structured, methodical in terms of their plan. Bill is the fox. He's like shrewd. He knows what people want to hear. He's at his worst. He's maybe people think of him as disingenuous and maybe a bit of a liar. But he's really good at like knowing. Foxes are probably the best politicians because they're just so good at knowing what people want,
what people
and need.
Want to hear.
Yeah. And they're great. And they do it. It's not in a bad way. I know the way I'm describing it sounds bad, but it's just they want to help people. And when they help people, they're great at brokering deals because they know what this person wants to hear. They know what this person wants to hear. And then they broker the deal between the two of them.
Okay. And one that everyone's talking about right now. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce.
Oh, another hunter pairing. And it makes sense, right? You had mentioned Jay-Z and Beyonce, and they're both performers, right? And then here we have a performer and an athlete, which is essentially a performer, right?
Yeah.
So funny enough, Kelsey's probably a peacock, just like Beyonce, and Taylor Swift's probably a butterfly. So those are really similar, peacocks and butterflies. Butterflies are very into I want to say they're not always into fashion, but generally they're women. They tend to be into fashion, but they're very into like making things beautiful, whether it like sounds beautiful, tastes great, looks beautiful, all those kinds of smells. They're really in touch with their senses. And then once again, peacocks are great at performing. They love moving and like the peacock type is the best at their body control. Like physical body control is where they succeed. And obviously Beyonce is a dancer and Kelsey's obviously a football player. So, and specifically a tight end, which is funny because tight ends and receivers, I know this is getting really wonky for anyone who does not know about football, but tight ends and receivers tend to need the best body control of all the football players versus like maybe a quarterback who's, sitting there throwing the ball.
Okay. And in the real world, this is the final one. Kim Kardashian and Kanye West.
Ooh, I think that's another hunter pairing. You're getting a lot of hunter, and they burned out fairly quickly, right? But I'd say Kim Kardashian is probably a butterfly, just like Taylor Swift. And then Kanye West is actually, let me think about it. I've never actually thought what Kanye West is, but I would go with a peacock as well. So it's almost like Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift, but in reverse.
In reverse. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's go to the fictional world. Let's start with Harry Potter. Ron and Harry.
Ron and Harry. Oh, let me do Ron, Harry, and Hermione because I love this. This is an example of theory, at least theoretical level. Hermione is a killer whale, as I'd mentioned before. Hard-driving, ambitious, great student. Ron is an elephant. An elephant, I haven't mentioned that type yet, but they're a gatherer type. They are all about family, bringing people together into their family. That's their priority. Obviously, Ron brings Harry into his family.
Yeah.
Harry is a humpback whale. They're a shaman type. They're all about self-knowledge and trying to figure out about themselves. I mentioned before, they tend to float around and kind of not always the most ambitious, just like Harry. And the funny thing is Harry and Hermione theoretically are the best pairing with each other. And Hermione and Ron are not necessarily a great pairing. And it's funny because I think J.K. Rowling even came out and said, yeah, when I did that, it's probably not the best pairing, but I made that decision very early on, so maybe I screwed up. I just think it's kind of funny that it kind of works out that way, where really Harry and Hermione probably should end up together.
Interesting. And what aspects would make them a great match?
Hermione, if you notice, just in the story itself, Hermione always has the plans, and she has this like she's the serious student.
She's the planner. She has strategies.
Yeah, she's the strategist. Actually, killer whales are the best at strategy, or at least in terms of I always say concurrent strategy, where everyone's going at the same time. And Harry is the humpback whale, so he's the executor of those plans. But since he's abstract, he's the most likely to understand those plans versus maybe just a strict operator. Harry is someone who will take those plans and then be flexible and do that. And in terms of romantic coupling, they work well together too, because Harry is just that person who, what he would give to Hermione gives him the structure and the planning and the drive, and Harry gives her, because killer whales sometimes have a problem with, they get so into like whatever their plan is that they forget to pull themselves out of it and understand why they're doing it and reflect.
Okay.
And so Harry spends most of his time reflecting. So
Harry and Ginny.
Harry was a humpback whale. Ginny is a shark. She's a great athlete. She's very specific. She's focused. I believe she becomes a great aurer at the end, which is basically a fighter. Yeah. So she's a shark. That shark would be a hunter type. It's similar to a fox, but a little bit more. As the difference between a fox and a shark, I always say a fox will shoot 1,000 bullets to hit one target. A shark will wait 1,000 minutes to shoot one bullet to hit one target.
Oh, okay. Okay, a lot more patient.
Yeah, a lot more patient. They're like the sniper. Well, a fox is just like, they'll just fire away.
Yeah, hoping one of them goes and hits.
Yeah, well, they don't hope. They just know. They're just like, well, I percentages are that one's going to hit, so I'm going to fire away. You're not going to. A fox will always say you miss 100% of the shots that you don't shoot. So,
what was Michael Jordan?
He's a shark.
He's a
He's
shark.
definitely, when you think of sharks, you just think of their weakness is that they have a very narrow focus, which can help them as well, right? But they can be a bit narrow-minded, right? If you're like narrow, you don't see anything on the outside. However, if you're very narrow, you definitely kill whatever's in front of you. And I just think of Michael Jordan as a straight-up killer, right? Like he goes in and he just like focuses on his task and he does it, and nothing's going to stop him.
That's interesting because the quote that you mentioned, I think, was Michael Jordan's quote, and he was someone who would practice a lot. So I'm curious why you thought he was a shark, because I would think he would be more in the fox, who would just shoot and do a lot more.
Oh, but so practice is something that a shark would do. So a fox would do that too, but a fox would be the type who practices a lot and doesn't tell anyone that they practice, and then they act like, oh, this is the first time I'm playing this game, and they're good. And like, oh, I guess I'm naturally good at it. Where a shark they have no problem telling people how hard they work. Their mindset is like, no, I worked my ass off. I shot 1,000 shots over the summer or whatever, 1,000 shots a day over the summer, and now I'm going to take that practice and I'm going to put it into this game and crush you with it. Mm-hmm. So sharks are just a lot more aggressive. Foxes can be everybody's friend. I don't think Michael Jordan's anybody's friend. He's more like people respect him because he's scary, right? They're like, oh, okay, all respect to Michael Jordan, but whereas like let's say Magic Johnson is a peacock. He's like vivacious. He's like outgoing. He's like, look at me, guys, look at me. And even now, like in business, like he's been a successful businessman because he takes it to that where he is a showman, right? So,
okay. Final question before we close our podcast today. What is one message you would like to leave for the world if they ever come back and listen to this again and again as a reminder?
I think the message I would say, as a reminder, I would remind people that your values are not necessarily the values of the people around you. Even the people closest to you, even your children, they might not value the same things that you value, and you just have to be okay with that and understand that that's what makes the world beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. Got to learn so much about people's archetypes, and this was amazing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be able to talk about Ron, Harry, and Hermione because, I was holding that in quite a bit. I really, I think Hermione and J.K. Rowling made a big mistake.
Thank you again for being on the podcast, and it was a great time.
Thank you so much for having me.